Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Soleah Enderle.
I'm John Case.
Together today we're going to be talking about normal grief that could occur from a crisis situation. And some of our examples today, John, we're going to use loss of a significant other.
Yes. And normal grief is what we're going to be talking about today. It's also referred to as uncomplicated grief. And it encompasses a broad range of feelings and behaviors that are very common after a loss.
Anyone counseling the bereaved needs to be familiar with the broad range of behaviors that fall under the description of normal grief. And one of those, John, is the feeling of sadness.
Yes, sadness.
It's the most common feeling found in the bereaved and really needs little comment.
Yes.
This feeling is not necessarily manifested by crying, but sometimes it can be.
Yeah, crying is very normal part of grief. Anger is another form of normal grief. It's frequently experienced after a loss, and it can be one of the most confusing feelings for a survivor, as such there are many problems in the grieving process. And this anger comes from two sources. One is the sense of frustration that there was nothing you could do and you felt powerless, and usually the guilt is manifested over something that had happened or something that was neglected around the time of death. So there's a little guilt feeling with the anger over.
Very normal.
That is,
I think it's normal in most cases.
I believe so.
Anxiety in the survivor can range from a light sense of insecurity when we're talking about anxiety. It could range from a light sense of not feeling quite right to a major on panic attack, which
that would be
complicated.
Yeah,
yes.
and in cases of complicated grief, you probably need to see a doctor. We're moving beyond normal grief then.
Mm-hmm.
And loneliness is a big part of the grieving process, and it is feeling frequently expressed. It's felt frequently by survivors, particularly those who have lost a spouse that used to be close in a day-to-day relationship. You know, feeling lonely that's only natural.
That is very natural. Sometimes people feel shock.
Yes.
They go through that whole shock occurs in most cases of sudden death, but actually shock can also, I had a shocking phone call when a friend of mine who I went to high school with, and she'd been a very good friend of mine, died of a heart attack. So that was shocking.
Instant.
It was instant.
Instant.
But you know, some people can still feel that shock even when they know the end is coming.
Even when you know it's coming. See, that's what I've heard, that even when you know it's imminent, that there's going to be a loss, you're still shocked when it actually happens, and that's normal.
That is normal.
That's normal. There's also another normal part of grief is yearning, which the British call pining. I love that word. And yearning is a normal response to a loss. And when it does come to an end, it may be a clinical sign indicating traumatic grief.
Yep.
So yearning is okay in the beginning, but it can manifest into complicated grief.
Sometimes people feel a certain emancipation of someone who's been tyrannical in their life or overbearing in their life.
I can see that.
Sometimes when they pass, some people can actually feel a little bit of relief or emancipation.
That almost can run into guilt, couldn't it? If you're feeling relief that
somebody passed.
They're gone. But this is all normal. This is all normal. And talking about relief, and as you know, the list of these, remember that each of these items, they represent normal grief feelings, and there's nothing pathological about any one of them.
However, feelings that exist for abnormally long periods of time and at an excessive intensity may portend a complicated grief reaction.
Right. You got to make that distinction between normal grieving and complicated grieving.
And if it continues to go into a crisis situation where the person just can't deal with any of those feelings. So let's talk a bit about physical sensations.
Well, one of the interesting things about physical sensations is not only the emotions that people experience, but also the physical. There's actual physical experiences, sensations associated with acute grief reactions.
Sometimes these sensations are overlooked, but they do play a significant role in the grieving process.
Mhm.
The following is a list of most commonly reported sensations experienced by people who are seen for grief counseling,
Mhm.
including a hollowness in the stomach, and
Right.
that's just that dread in
Right,
the
right.
pit.
You can actually get a tightness in the chest.
And in the throat, maybe not even be able to talk.
This is what I found interesting, is oversensitivity to noise. Maybe just you're a little bit on edge, and that physical sensation is carrying through.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes there's a sense of depersonalization, meaning that people can walk down the street and absolutely nothing even seems real. Like their whole world is kind of like a la-la land.
Right. And I've heard times people get breathless, short of breath, even almost like, I guess it could be a panic attack.
That could definitely sound like a panic attack. There's weakness in the muscles.
A lack of energy. So the cognitions now, there are many different thought patterns that mark the experience of grief. And certain thoughts are common in the early stages of grieving and usually disappear after a short period of time. But sometimes thoughts persist and trigger feelings that can lead to depression or anxiety.
Absolutely. We know that, right, John? Sometimes you can think about something and you think about it all the time, and that leads to a feeling.
It's almost like a cognition.
Yeah. So sometimes there's disbelief as well.
Right, and disbelief, like, no way did this just happen. There must be a mistake. I can't believe it happened. I don't believe, I don't want to believe it happened. And these are often the first thoughts that occur after hearing of the death, especially if the death was sudden.
And confusion. A lot of people bereaved and in crisis as well, both think they can't seem to get their thoughts in order, and they have difficulty concentrating. And
that seems perfectly normal.
It does.
To be a little fuzzy brain after something like that. Sometimes you get preoccupations. They can be obsessive thoughts about the deceased. And these often include obsessive thoughts about how to recover that lost person. Sometimes preoccupation takes the form of intrusive thoughts or images of the deceased suffering or dying. You get this thought, oh my God, they've been suffering, and that's all normal part.
That's all a normal part.
So behaviors. Let's talk about behaviors.
There's a number of specific behaviors frequently associated with normal grief reactions. They're going to range from sleep disturbances, which is, we all know how that goes, and appetite disturbances to absent-mindedness and social withdrawal. Some of the following behaviors are reported after a loss, and they usually do correct themselves over time.
Right.
What's the first one there?
The first one is sleep disturbances. And it's not unusual for people who are on early stages of a loss to experience sleep disturbances. And these may include difficult going to sleep, early morning awakening, and sleep disturbances sometimes might need a medical intervention. But it shouldn't be. Sleep disorders can sometimes symbolize various fears, including the fear of dreaming or the fear of being in bed alone. So it's perfectly normal to have some sleep disturbances, but if it persists, again, it could be going into complicated grief, and you might need to see a doctor for that.
Okay. Appetite disturbances, that's going to be either undereating, or sometimes we compensate, and it's a coping mechanism to overeat. So although we talk about appetite disturbances being somebody not eating for days, it could very well go the other way as well, and it could be an issue for overeating as a coping.
Something that you should watch if it gets into an eating disorder. And then we're going into the complicated grief, but right now we're just talking about the normal grief. And this is something that I even have trouble with, absent-minded behavior. But the newly bereaved may find themselves acting in an absent-minded way or doing things that may ultimately cause them inconvenience or harm. Well, maybe they lose the keys frequently.
Losing the keys would be an easy one. If they forget to go to work, that's a different little absent-mindedness, but it could happen in complicated grief for sure.
Something to watch out for.
So there's crying too, and crying is a behavior.
Crying would be perfectly normal.
It's perfectly normal. There's been speculation that tears even actually have a potential healing value. So, but once again, if it goes into that's all you do all day for months and months and months.
Now we're into the
complicated grief again.
Social withdrawal is something that it's not unusual for people who sustain a loss to want to withdraw from other people. Again, this is usually a short-lived phenomenon and usually corrects itself.
Okay. You know, it's important for bereavement counselors to understand the wide range of behaviors that we've covered here about normal grief, so that they don't pathologicalize the behavior and they just see them as normal, that they know that they're dealing with just normal.
This is a normal grieving process.
Normal grieving process. That's right, John.
And having this understanding will also enable counselors to give reassurance to people who experience such behavior as disturbing, especially in the case of their first significant loss. However, if these experiences persist late into the bereavement process, we might be going into complicated grief at that point.
Okay. So let's talk a bit now, John, about the goals of grief counseling and grief therapy. The goals of grief counseling typically include helping the bereaved move toward acceptance through guiding the individual to talk about the loss, who the person was to them, and the circumstances surrounding the death. That might be a little difficult sometimes to talk about. In addition, it's important to help the bereaved label and describe their feelings and their emotions that encompass the loss.
Yes, and another important goal of grief counseling is to help the individual learn coping strategies through tough times, such as anniversaries, holidays, birthdays, milestones, and letting the bereaved know that the emotions they are feeling are normal and expected is also a significant component of grief counseling. You want to let them know that you're not freaking out. This is something that's absolutely normal. And two very, very critical constituents of grief counseling included helping the bereaved to understand their coping behavior and to identify coping mechanisms that are problematic or unhealthy for the individual.
Well, and John, we know without these basic principles, the person may continue unhealthy patterns, and then they're going to need more extensive therapy, such as grief therapy. But it goes, once again, it would go into complicated grief.
True. The different models of grief that psychologists and researchers have outlined, they've outlined various models of phases of grief. And in 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified 5 linear stages of grief that most people are now familiar with: denial, anger, depression, and acceptance.
Kubler-Ross originally developed this model to illustrate the process of grief associated with death, but she eventually adapted the model to account for any kind of grief, because we know that we go through grief even when we lose a job, when the school year ends. No grief there for me. Kubler-Ross also noted that everyone experiences at least 2 of the 5 stages of grief, and she acknowledged that some people may actually revisit certain stages over and over again throughout their lifetime.
True. Where we got most of our information is from psychologist J.W. Worden, who also created a stage-based model for coping with the death of a loved one. And he called this the 4 tasks of mourning: to accept the reality of the loss, to work through the pain of grief, to adjust to life without the deceased, and to maintain a connection to the deceased while moving on with life.
Okay. Well,
let's say you wanted to talk to somebody.
Yes,
You know,
I do.
somebody just had a significant loss. You know, what would be a good way to start out a conversation to get them to talk, so that maybe they can start to go through the process of grieving?
That's great, John. These are great points that we're going to talk about here now, because you could start that process by helping to create an environment that is quiet, a private place to talk, and then by projecting warmth, interest, and respect.
Yeah, you can ask them about the funeral, how everything went.
Sometimes they're not ready to talk about that, and
They
sometimes
might not.
they are.
You have to feel the conversation.
You would have to feel that out. You could ask what coping skills they used in the past during a crisis situation, and then encourage them to utilize if they were good coping skills. Encourage them to go ahead and use those again.
Right. You can help them acknowledge their past accomplishments as a way to reestablish their self-esteem.
You could also affirm with them their ability to survive their current loss, which could be difficult if it was a woman who it was her husband and he did everything. So that would be, it would be tough.
Well, you can also affirm their ability to survive the current loss. You have the ability to get over it.
Right.
You
Yes,
have to
everyone does.
continue.
You could ask them about their relationship with the deceased.
That's a good idea. And remind the survivor that it is normal to feel overwhelmed by this intensity of feelings.
There's a lot of feelings involved, isn't there, John?
And it's okay to be overwhelmed.
Yeah. You could help them identify feelings of loss and pain. You can acknowledge that pain is part of the grieving process and reassure them that the pain isn't always going to be as intense as it is today.
And another big thing you can do is you can give them the permission to cry.
Yes.
Some people might feel that comforting. It's okay to let it out.
Okay.
That's normal part of grieving.
Mm-hmm. You could give them permission also to feel relieved, like we talked about earlier in the emancipation. Yes. You could say, it's okay for you to feel relieved that the person.
Yes, especially after a loss, maybe from an extended illness.
Yes.
And there's a tough one there because at the same time, you're feeling relieved that they're not suffering anymore. You're going through a lot of other emotions at the same time. But that's okay. That's normal grief. And, grief is an exhaustive process, both physically and emotionally. So it's important to encourage them to take extra care of themselves. Make sure they're eating well, they're drinking plenty of water, and do they get enough sleep, exercise if you need to, and try not to do any drinking or mind-altering drugs, because that can really hinder the process of normal grief and could lead you into some other problems.
Those are some negative coping skills that some people could use if they were in crisis. We want to be aware of those for sure.
Yes.
We can also remind them to have a realistic expectation about how long the grieving could take.
Yes.
Because we can't expect them to be over it in a day or two.
No.
It's going to take
2 years is.
That's complicated.
You're in a complicated grief. And encourage them to take one day at a time, because at times it might be easier to break the day up into manageable pieces.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Don't try and take it all at one time.
We could also suggest that they start slowly to return to their normal routine by doing small things, small chores such as shopping.
Set some small goals.
Small goals.
That will help reassure some confidence,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. And reassure them that it's okay to set limits with other people, to be able to say no. If somebody is coming on too strong or you just don't feel like talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to say no.
Absolutely. We can affirm with them their right to feel joy and hope eventually, and eventually to, move on and get into another relationship if that's part of what they want, without them being viewed as disloyal to the person who's passed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, coming to our conclusion, there's some great talking points, by the way.
Yeah, and great resources, I feel, John, that we've shared with our viewers today.
Exactly. Thank you guys for showing up.
Right. That we've shared with them about ways to help the person
Mm-hmm.
who is the survivor.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So grief and bereavement are natural emotions that we're all going to experience. Simply knowing the definition of grief and bereavement is not enough to effectively help clients. The key for us as counselors and as crisis people is to understand how grief and bereavement affect individuals differently, and then take notice in the variation of comprehension and grief presentation, different stages of grief that your person is going through.
Correct. Also, the knowledge of the client's cultural beliefs and practices. It continues to be a very important construct of the grieving process, and proper training in grief counseling techniques is critical to be an effective counselor in this field. I think we've hit on some pretty vague topics of the grieving process, tried to get a little bit into some talking points to help people understand what is normal grief. So after a loss, it would be very easy to think that some of the thoughts they have are not normal.
I agree. And also, we gave some counselors some very realistic points that they could take into a session with somebody who's experiencing a crisis through the grief process.
Yes.
So that they could be able to help. What we didn't talk about, which we could talk about in another program, is the exact resources that we might be able to hand them. Like, as well as talking about these points at the end of the appointment, it would be very nice for us to be able, if they were having signs of complicated grief, for us to actually have resources, and we would have resources for them to take with them.
Absolutely. There's very, very good programs that deal with exactly bereavement and grief
Yes.
counseling and
John,
therapy.
I think this has been great today.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very
I have too.
much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.